This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stockbox interview. Joining us today is Clara Burtenshaw, who is a partner at Neo Kuma Ventures. Now, the company is not a listed entity, but they are investors in the medical psychedelic space. So welcome, Clara. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's good to be talking to you. We have interviewed a number of companies on the platform who are in the medical psychedelic space. It seems to me this space is fairly new. It reminds me of the cannabis, medicinal cannabis space a few years ago. Very much of a taboo subject, but it seems to be moving into a far more positive light and getting the recognition it deserves. But I wonder if you could just start us off by just introducing the company. Who are Neo Kuma and what are you doing?
Yeah, so Neo Kuma Ventures is a London-based fund. We're a £20 million fund, and we are investing in what we see to be the leading companies in the sector, developing new medicines to treat people with very difficult to treat conditions. We're also investing in clinics and care delivery and picks and tools and platforms that are all part of this new revolutionary and paradigm-changing approach to the treatment of mental health, which is using psychedelic therapies to address the root causes of mental illness. We see these products as being revolutionary from yesterday. The sector is nascent today, and we believe they'll be world-changing tomorrow. So we are investing across every aspect of the treatment arc for a patient using psychedelic healthcare.
So could you perhaps just set the scene with regards to psychedelic drugs then? Was there quite a lot of research ongoing that was quite promising? And where do you see it now in this kind of development stage?
Yeah, so the really sort of a shutting down by US federal agencies in terms of being able to access the drugs that were required to run clinical research. You obviously can't research a substance which is prohibited, which you can't get a license to handle. And so whilst that was really, I think, the headline and what everyone believed, I think there were some very brave scientists who were doing as much as they can sort of behind closed doors on research. So I didn't think it was ever sort of fully shut down. The 70s, 80s, 90s. And then what we found was some scientists in the US really reviving research into the sector. Johns Hopkins leading the charge on studies, the Beckley Foundation in the UK, investing in research at a time where it was still a very unpopular topic. And then I think the real sort of turning point has been big business leaders in the US investing in the space, and that really paving the way for more of a long-lasting industry. The FDA actually turning around and designating breakthrough status to 3 psychedelics. So recognizing that MDMA, ketamine, and psilocybin hold a lot of promise for the treatment of patients, and therefore fast-tracking some of the clinical trial process for companies working with those drugs to expedite the process of trying to legalize and regulate those substances. And then, and that's really sort of birthed this new movement of scientists and investors working together to try to plug some of the gaps in research and develop new drugs to target various indications, and also plugging a gap which was left wide open by big pharma not wishing to pursue research in these tricky areas, neuroscience, etc. And really the hope, I think, of funds like Neo Kuma and others in the space and private investors who are investing in the space is, can we bridge the gap and get these drugs far enough along in their development so that then we have this opportunity for big pharma to partner up with these small companies and to help them develop on the scale required to treat some of the sizes of these unmet needs. Because much like I think with these sort of early medical cannabis days, there's this real blockage in terms of having enough money to run the clinical trials required to develop these new medicines in a way that's commercially viable. And that's where, private investment really steps in to facilitate, bridging this gap. Can we develop, data-driven, evidence-based research and trials up to the point where you may have collaborations with big pharma? And last year we started to see the green shoots of big pharma looking at this space. Obviously, I think a big sort of trigger as well of big pharma sort of working with small pharma here is that we've also had a derivative of ketamine, esketamine, available since 2019 in the US for the treatment of treatment-resistant depression. And that's available, and it's owned by Janssen and Johnson & Johnson. And so that's already available under Big Pharma. It was a drug that was sitting in one of their libraries that was fast-tracked through clinical trials to try to treat that indication.
Okay. And what would be the end objective then, Clara? Would it be that these companies would be taken out by pharmaceutical companies, or they would get their product to market and that would give you a return on the investment?
Yeah, so there are a number of different exit opportunities that make this space interesting for an investor. Unlike probably your traditional life sciences and biotech route, where it's a long road to an exit or a partnership with big pharma, because of the FDA's support and fast tracking of some of the elements of clinical trials, we're seeing a typical 8 to 10-year path reduced by a number of years, which means that it's quicker to exit. In the very early days, when there's a lot of hype and hope about psychedelics, much like with cannabis and a lot of these nascent spaces, there were big opportunities for companies to list in favorable markets like those in Canada and actually IPO before they've even gotten into the clinic. And quite often those companies were going to market with, clutching patents that had been filed, but perhaps not yet granted, and raising on the Canadian markets. And so there were some very sort of quick exits there. That's not really where we invest. We are trying to back companies who know how drug discovery is done, also have access to non-dilutive funding along the way, research grants, etc. I think with those, either there'll be a partnership between a big pharma and a portfolio company between phase 2 and phase 3. And those conversations are already ongoing. The other alternative is that the company tries to become the distributor and the big pharma itself, because these are massive unmet needs and very large target markets. That's on the drug development side. On clinics, there's always sort of the private equity path where you develop a number of clinics and you may flip them onto a larger clinic provider who's waiting for these therapies to be more widely available. And that gives a clinic operating now an opportunity to break the market and possibly sort of then sell out to a larger network provider. And then with the platforms, much like many technologies, and there I think we would see IPOs or sales to much larger tech players who are looking for that type of technology. There's definitely a lot of opportunity for the investor over the next 8 years with accelerated drug development pathways and looking at clinics, care delivery and technology.
Okay. Well, Clara Burtenshaw at Neo Kuma Ventures, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. You're most welcome.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programmes at stopboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.